Okay, so we're back. Psychosocial development in early childhood. Let's start with something that's super important in the early years, parenting. Baumrind said that there are different styles that parents can adopt. There are permissive parents. We have a cartoon, no, you don't have to wear your helmets. I'll just lie here and be the speed bump. Caption says permissive parenting reaches a new low. Permissive parents are much more interested in their children's autonomy, and they oftentimes will treat their children as young as they really are and not give them appropriate levels of responsibility in their efforts to make sure that their children are sort of getting to do what they want to do. And I don't mean it in any kind of neglectful way. I mean more I'm trying to help my child to figure out the limitations of the environment. They have to figure that out through natural consequences. So permissive parents oftentimes will be non-directive, very warm, things like that. Whereas authoritarian parents, they feel like they sometimes treat their children as younger than they really are too. But now it's because they feel like their children are not capable of making decisions. This mom says, eat the damn spinach. When you're 18, you can have a mind of your own. Authoritarian parents feel like their kids should follow the rules. Authoritative parents are much more likely to listen to their children, but also to the authority figure, that when it comes down to it, I have to make decisions. So there's a little bit of dynamic interplay where authoritative parents are willing to listen to their kids and are warm with their kids, but they also are ultimate decision makers. So we've got warm, non-demanding, non-controlling would be permissive, unquestioning obedience, and controlling would be authoritarian, firm, clear, flexible, and rational, authoritative. All right, so let's break this down. So we've got our three styles on the left. So the permissive parent and the authoritative parent both score high in warmth. So they tend, especially between 2 and 6 years of age, you see a lot of hugging and encouragement, things like that out of permissive and authoritative parents, and less of that in the authoritarian. In the discipline area, permissive parents rarely ever invoke any kind of discipline. Authoritarians are strict on pretty much everything. There's a rule. So there's a lot of discipline. They're more likely, of all the three types, they're the most likely physical discipline. The authoritative parent they're more in the moderate range, where they have rules about the things that they think are important, but they don't have as many rules as an authoritarian does. And they're less likely to use physical discipline. They're more likely to use or time out, or some consequence that's tied to behavior, things like that. Communication style. Communication from the parent to the child tends to be lower permissive parents. The permissive parents don't tell their kids as much stuff as authoritarian and authoritative parents do. The child talking to the adult is high permissive in the authoritative and lower in the authoritarian. A lot of times authoritarians have taught their children that questioning things is backtalk, things like that. So children don't initiate as much interaction verbally with their parents when the parents are authoritarian as they do when the parents are permissive or authoritative. Finally, we have expectations of maturity, and I already kind of mentioned that permissive parents tend to treat their children as a lot younger than they really are. I also mentioned that authoritarian parents treat their children a little younger than they are. They have this high level of, by now, you should be able to do this kind of attitude. And so sometimes you have an authoritarian parent who sort of infantilizes a child and says, you don't get to make decisions. But then on the other hand, you have them saying, you should know better than that by now. You're 3 years old. You should know better than that. The authoritative parent is in the more moderate range, because as the child ages, the authoritative parent adjusts their expectations to correspond to the child's capabilities. So here's a nice graphic that kind of shows the three types that I went over. I left out uninvolved because I thought that's not really a parenting type, right? Where you're just sort of like, I'm not even helping. But so you can kind of see some of the adjectives that go along with the different styles of parenting. And I think it might be kind of clear that authoritative seems to be the style that works the best in achieving the goals that all of the three styles that I talked about, they seem to have. All three types, the authoritarian, the authoritative, and the permissive parents, will report they want their children to get a sense of self-control. They are trying to raise kids who will be able to decide for themselves what to do and what not to do. But they just have different ways of achieving that. The authoritarian thinks, well, I have to be really rigid and really controlling when kids are little so that they don't break the rules. And then they will internalize that when they become adults, they won't break the rules. The permissive parent says, well, you'll figure it out. It's not really up to me to decide, and you'll ultimately figure out what works for you. So you'll go to bed when you're tired, you'll eat when you're hungry, and you'll bring a jacket if you're cold. Authoritative parents instead say, you know what, let me give you some guidelines, and then I will discuss the rules as you age into the appropriate era to, discussing the rules and things like that. And the goal is ultimately that self-regulation that authoritatively raised kids tend to display more in the authoritarian or the permissive. Now, reinforcement punishment is something that comes up a lot when we talk about how to parent kids. Reinforcement, you can use behavior modification to train your little learner into doing what you want. So the goal in behavior modification is to catch your child doing something that you like and then reward them for those desirable behaviors. Now, of course, we have the risk that we might over-justify their behaviors, where they start to think, I used to just do this because I liked it, but mom keeps giving me a reward every time I do it. Now it feels like a job. And you can turn a kid who used to just do it because they liked it into a kid who doesn't feel like doing it anymore. So you have to worry about the over-justification effects. And then we also have to worry about it, the kid becoming just completely extrinsically motivated. They're only doing it in the hope of getting some kind of reward. So one of the ways that you kind of adjust the behavior modification technique and avoid over-justification and extrinsic motivators is to invoke a token economy. You can buy these things on the internet, or you can do like I do and just make stuff up. But the idea is you have some kind of token. In this case, it's putting a star on the board for the child doing the desirable behaviors. And then when they've accumulated enough stars, they get some kind of reward. And you're supposed to tell them on this chart, you're supposed to say, my goal is X number of stars, and my reward is whatever. So the child knows what they're working for. That way you don't get the over-justification effect where you're just rewarding every single thing. You're not getting them focused on the stars. You're just encouraging them to do the things that they should be doing. I did a token economy. Like I said, I just make them up as I go along and whatever works for my child at the time. When my son was probably 12, he started getting pretty addicted to his video games, and he would play and play and play, and if you tried to make him stop playing because it was dinner time or bedtime, he would have a little bit of flip out. And so I decided to invoke a token economy where I literally gave him a button. We called it a button economy. I gave him a button for all the things he was supposed to do and did without me having to nag him. So like if he got the trash, if he did his homework, if he did all these things, he accumulated buttons. And I very carefully made sure that it took exactly that many buttons that he should have earned today, takes that many buttons to play video games for 1 hour. So as it was set up, it did a really good job of making sure that he knew he could only buy an hour's worth of time because he only had that many tokens. You have to be flexible, though, as a parent in using these kinds of things because so what he started to do is he started wrestling. So he had practice after school, and he accumulated a bunch of buttons, and he had probably 10 hours worth of buttons saved up before he really finally got time to actually play video games. And he's like, here are all my buttons. I'm like, oh no, this is not what I planned to do, is like give you a 10-hour binge. So we had to, I had to work on it all the time. And so to be reinforcing, the child has to want the reward. Like at that time, he was more interested in wrestling than he was in video game playing. So he accumulated those tokens. And then when he had the opportunity, he was like, okay, suddenly I want to turn in my tokens, right? You also have to be really consistent about rewarding the desirable behavior because your goal is to get the desirable behavior to occur, right? You want to be focusing on being able to reward your little learner. So I gave you a story from when he was 12. Back when my kids were 2 to 6 years old, I was, invoking these kinds of token economies just to try and get them to brush their teeth every night without, a wrestling match, or to put their dishes on the counter when they were little and couldn't do anything else but put their dish on the counter. Those kinds of things. You reward them for the desirable behavior and try and, really instill some habits in them. So the reward must consistently follow the behavior. So here's the basic flow chart for how to use a token economy. So at the beginning, the child has no tokens, has no access to the desired items and activities. That's a really critical point. You can't say to them, well, you have to earn X number of tokens in order to play the video games, and then not really be there to monitor whether they're playing video games. They have to have no access unless they work for it. They do the desired behavior, you give token, yay, because they wanted, and then ultimately they earn enough tokens to be able to turn them in to get the thing that they want. And so it all has to be the cycle, right, where they are hungry again, right? They've used up their tokens, now they're hungry again for tokens, and then they work for them again, and so it becomes a system. But no system works permanently, so you have to be flexible. And what about punishment? Okay. A lot of people go, it's ineffective. Well, here are the times when punishment is effective. Sometimes we inadvertently reward here when we're trying to punish them. When my daughter was in the pre-operational stage, right? She was I was working on my dissertation, and she was 2.5-ish, and she was such a good little girl. She'd sit there and she'd play very quietly, and I would like, okay, so I do a lot of reading while we were at the park, getting myself ready, and so I'd have to sit down and literally put it in the computer. This was the old days where you literally had to sit at your desk with the desktop computer and literally type. So I would try and do it in like little bursts of translating my notes onto the computer while she was quietly playing. So she's sitting there at the floor quietly playing. I know that I've got about 15 minutes, so I'm typing as fast as I can to get all my stuff in there. And she was still playing really quietly, so I thought, I just have a little bit more to type. I'm almost done. So I start just frantically trying to type it up. And she starts making, vocalizations. Clearly she wants me to stop typing. She's like, I'm like, I'm almost done, baby. I'll just keep playing, big girl, typing. And she goes, Mommy. She starts getting more adamant. I'm almost done. So she comes over and she pulls out the desk drawer that is full of all my data that's all organized. It's response sheets, and it's all organized by subject, and it's all, like perfectly organized. And her little hand is just about to grab some of my data. I'm like, no. Okay, so I wanted to, overreact because don't touch mommy's data. But then I realized, okay, but if I do anything right now, it's going to reward the grabbing behavior, right? So I can't even act like I saw that. Instead, I have to, stop typing. I obviously pushed it, and then attend to her. Say, hey, are you ready to do something else? And I just ignored the grabbing behavior. And that was the one time I ever saw her pull the drawer out and act like she was going to grab it. But I didn't want to accidentally reward. When mommy's ignoring you, you can get her attention by digging into her data, right? So you have to be really careful with that. Ignoring good behavior and just only react when they're bad. Because again, you might end up rewarding bad behavior because that's the way that they can get your attention. Making them wait for their punishment for any reason. I gave the old classic 1950s, wait till your father comes home attitude, but making them wait any amount of time gives them time to forget what they did wrong, and then it seems like consequence just comes out of nowhere. So whenever there's a misdeed, you have to immediately apply the punishment, or else it won't work at all. There are 4 criteria for effective punishment. Like I just said, it needs to be immediate. It needs to be clear. It needs to be brief. You need to give them an explanation for what they did wrong, and consistent. Every single time they do that wrong thing, they get the same consequence. And the punisher needs to be somebody who they love and respect. It can't be, send them down to the principal who they've never met before. It needs to be somebody who they care about and who they respect. Now, timeout can be very effective if used correctly. It's a difficult technique to use correctly because kids have all sorts of time to be super annoying. So I posted in our classroom this clip from Super Nanny, and she shows how to do the timeout technique. And what is hard for parents who effectively use timeout is teaching the child that this is going to be the consequence. And so the kids oftentimes want to get up, they want to scream, they want to just they want to punish you for having attempted to punish them. And so getting over that little hump so that they start to realize this is just a consequence, and this is going to be the consequence if you do what I've asked you not to do, And you have to clearly explain what you expect of them, give them a warning, and if they decide to do the thing that you have told them not to do anyway, then they get the timeout consequence. It needs to be very specifically tied to their age. You don't want to have a 3-year-old sitting for an hour in their bedroom. A 3-year-old should have 3 minutes of timeout. That's it. It's a consequence. It's not designed to like break their spirit. Now, let's distinguish reinforcement from punishment. Reinforcement can be positive, which is when you add something desirable, like giving the child a piece of candy or giving them a hug. Negative reinforcement is when you take something undesirable away. So you remove an undesirable consequence. So for example, you don't have to eat your vegetables if you'll just take a bite of the other things on your plate. Or I won't spank you if you do what I've asked. So removing something undesirable. So I've given you 2 pictures of undesirable things, but we're going to take those away. We're not going to do them to the child. We're going to take away the possibility that happens. With punishment, there's also positive and negative. Positive punishment is we're going to add something undesirable. So maybe make you do extra chores or give you a lecture. That's adding something that the child doesn't want. Negative reinforcement, negative punishment would be when you remove something desirable. So the positive means to add, negative means to remove. Reinforcement means we're doing something that the learner wants, and punishment means we're doing something that the learner doesn't want. So under negative punishment, we're going to take away their toy. They have to maybe work for it to come back. We're going to put them in timeout, taking away their time with the other people, removing something desirable. So reinforcement, we're giving them an outcome that they want, and in punishment, we're giving them an outcome that they don't want. That's the big difference. So we have different kinds of parenting styles that parents can invoke, and we already talked about the 3 main types that they're doing on purpose, and that would be kind of interesting to talk about what the research has shown about which kinds of people are most likely to do what kinds of things. So for example, older parents are more likely to be authoritative with their children, and older is defined as greater than 25. People with more education are more likely to parent in an authoritative way. Married couples are more likely to parent in an authoritative way, and I'd like to argue that's because when you have another person who you can hand the child rearing duties over to periodically, like you're at your wit's end and you're about to get really super authoritarian on the kids or just give up and get really permissive, having a partner that you can kind of turn it over to makes it more likely that you can overall behave in an authoritative way. People who are more religious, a lot of times people equate religiosity with sort of the spare the rod, spoil the child attitude, but what has actually been found in the literature is that people who are more religious are more likely to expect obedience on certain things and to explain rules and really try and get their children on board with the rules. Spanking is most commonly determined by upbringing. I mentioned that authoritarian parents are the most likely to use the physical punishment, but really it's even authoritarian parents don't necessarily spank. It's something that, like, if you were spanked as a child, it's something that you're more likely to do. If it's something that happens in your culture more frequently, it's something that you're more likely to do. All right, that brings us to our final major topic. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break here, and we'll finish up in the next lecture with discussion of gender and gender development.